It's easy to believe nothing truly bad can happen on a trail like this. You park, slam the car doors, and follow the stream of people up toward Laurel Falls. Kids in neon sneakers, couples with iced coffee, grandparents stopping at every overlook. The roar of the water gets louder with every switchback. Cameras click. Water bottles crinkle. Somewhere down below, the road hums with traffic. And still, if you stop and listen, really listen, you can hear something else under all that noise. The way the forest goes quiet and then suddenly loud again. The way the mist seems to swallow sound instead of echo it. Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most visited national park in the United States. Millions of people walk these paths and drive these roads every year. Almost all of them go home tired and happy, with too many photos on their phones and a story about that one steep section of trail they weren't ready for. Almost all of them. Because a very small number walk into this park and never come back out. Not to their cars. Not to their campgrounds. Not to their families waiting by the fire. Their names get stapled to missing person posters and press releases and, eventually, old case files. Two of those names keep coming up, again and again, whenever people talk about the Smokies and the ones who never came home. Dennis Martin. And Thelma Pauline Melton. They vanished more than a decade apart, on different trails, in different corners of the park. But if you stand at the guardrail near Laurel Falls and watch the people leaning out for a better angle, it's not hard to imagine how quickly a day on the trail can turn into a story people still whisper about 50 years later. This is Fear Files. And tonight, we're walking into the Smokies to follow two people who stepped onto a trail and were never seen again. First, Dennis. Father's Day weekend, 1969. The Martins had a tradition. The men of the family would go camping in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. That year, they chose the high country, Cades Cove up to Russell Field, then on to a grassy bald called Spence Field, where the forest opens and the sky feels closer than the ground. Dennis Lloyd Martin was 6 years old. He was small for his age, shy, with dark hair and a red shirt that made him easy to spot in the summer green. This was a big trip. He was camping with his father, his grandfather, and his older brother. Another family with boys around the same age had joined them, and by the afternoon of June 14th, the kids were restless and ready for a game. The plan they came up with was simple: hide in the trees along the edge of the clearing and jump out to scare the adults as they walked by. The other boys went one way. Dennis went the other. His father watched him step off toward the bushes, a small flash of red disappearing into the undergrowth. It should have been the kind of memory you tell again at every family reunion. Remember when you tried to scare us and tripped over that root? Remember how you popped out too early and started laughing? Instead, it became the moment everything froze. The other boys jumped out and did their part. Laughter. Shouting. A little scolding from the grown-ups. But Dennis didn't come back with them. His father waited a minute, then another. Called his name. Stepped into the trees himself, expecting to find a little boy trying not to giggle behind a thin screen of leaves. There was nothing. Within minutes, concern turned to panic. Dennis's father ran down the trail, calling for his son, certain he'd catch up to him around the next bend. He kept going, nearly 2 miles downhill, because that's what your brain tells you. He must have walked farther than we thought. But the trail kept going and Dennis wasn't on it. Back at Spence Field, other hikers joined in. Voices echoed into the ravines. People pushed through rhododendron thickets and peered over drop-offs, listening for the sobbing cry of a frightened child or the snap of a twig. Then the weather turned. That afternoon, the mountains were hit with a hard, cold rain, around 3 inches in just a few hours. Temperatures dropped toward 50 degrees that night. For an adult caught out in the open, soaked and unprepared, it would be miserable. For a 6-year-old boy in a t-shirt, shorts, and a light jacket, it could be deadly. By the next morning, the search had exploded. Rangers, volunteers, and eventually National Guard troops and Green Berets fanned out over the high ridges and down into the hollows. Helicopters thumped overhead. At its peak, roughly 1,400 people were involved, covering around 56 square miles of terrain, still the largest search effort in the park's history. On paper, it sounds thorough. Boots on the ground. Eyes on every slope. But the more people were out there, the more complicated it became. Untrained volunteers trampled through potential evidence. Tracks were found, small footprints, one bare and one wearing what looked like an Oxford-style shoe, the kind Dennis had on, but officials decided they belonged to a Boy Scout involved in the search, not to the missing boy. A retired ranger would later disagree, pointing out that no scouts had been searching barefoot in that area. There were no firm answers, just possibilities. Maybe Dennis got turned around in the trees, stumbled down one of the steep drainages, and was swept farther away when the heavy rain turned every gully into a temporary creek. Maybe he curled up under a rhododendron and never woke up. The woods are full of animals and insects and slow decay. A small body could disappear into that cycle faster than most people like to think about. But there was another thread, one that took the story from tragic accident into something darker. Around the same time Dennis vanished, a family visiting the park from out of state was driving along a nearby road. The father, a man named Harold Key, later told investigators that he and his family heard a scream from somewhere up the slope, high, sharp, and sickening, the kind of sound that makes the hair on your arms stand up. A short time later, they saw a rough-looking man emerge from the woods, hurrying downhill. He looked, in their memory, dirty and disheveled, as if he'd been off trail for some time. Some versions of the story say he seemed to be carrying something, maybe clothing, maybe red. Dennis had been wearing a bright red shirt. Park officials and the FBI eventually decided the sighting was probably unrelated. The distances and timing didn't line up cleanly. The terrain between Spence Field and the road was brutal, the kind of country that can turn a half-mile into an hour. And rumors have a way of growing mouths and wings. But to Dennis's father, that scream and that stranger never stopped mattering. He believed, until his death, that his son had been taken, snatched from the woods while playing hide and seek and carried out of the park before anyone knew he was gone. No body was ever found. For years, hikers, hunters, and even illegal ginseng diggers roamed the slopes with his name in the backs of their minds. One ginseng hunter later claimed he found a small skull and some bones in a remote hollow but never reported it, afraid of being arrested for trespassing and plant theft. When he finally came forward years later, search teams combed the area he described and found nothing. Today, Dennis Lloyd Martin is still officially missing. He would be in his early 60s now. Instead, he's frozen in the public imagination as that 6-year-old boy in the red shirt, stepping off the trail for a game that never ended. 12 years later, another name joined his in the park's unofficial roll call of the missing. Her friends called her Polly. Thelma Pauline Polly Melton was 58 in the fall of 1981. She was tall, about 5'11", sturdy, and outgoing, with a laugh people described as loud and contagious. She split her time between Jacksonville, Florida, and the mountains, spending part of each year camping with her husband in an Airstream trailer at Deep Creek Campground, on the North Carolina side of the park. Polly loved the Smokies. She hiked the trails around Deep Creek often, knew the paths and the landmarks. She had high blood pressure and smoked heavily, but she was no stranger to walking these hills. Locals and seasonal regulars recognized her at camp. She volunteered at her church back home. On the surface, her life looked settled, married, rooted, routine. On September 25, 1981, Polly went for an afternoon hike with 2 friends along the Deep Creek Trail, a popular, well-marked path not far from their campground. It was the sort of outing they'd done many times before, a few miles in, a turnaround, and back in time for dinner. At some point, Polly quickened her pace, telling the others she was going on ahead. One friend reportedly called after her, joking that she wouldn't want to race her. Polly laughed and kept walking. The trail curved. Polly passed over a small rise. Trees and terrain swallowed her from view. It was one of those ordinary little moments that happens on every hike, one person feeling strong that day, stretching their legs, promising to meet the others back at the car or at the next junction. Except when Polly's friends rounded that same bend, she wasn't there. At first, they assumed she'd simply kept going, maybe she needed the restroom at the trailhead, maybe she went back to check on her husband at the campground. But as the minutes piled up and the parking area stayed empty, worry set in. They notified rangers. Searches were launched along Deep Creek and the surrounding woods. Helicopters flew, dogs worked the trails, and volunteers walked miles of creekside path and ridgeline. Nothing. No clothing. No scraps of paper. No footprints that led anywhere useful. No body. Polly's husband was ruled out as a suspect. He was older, in poor health, and had been back at the camper. Investigators dug through her life. People whispered. Had she run away with someone? Was there a secret lover waiting at a rendezvous point beyond the trail? Had she decided, at 58, to vanish and start over somewhere else? There were hints that something in her life had shifted. Friends said she'd seemed more withdrawn in the weeks before she disappeared. She'd lost weight, seemed preoccupied. Some accounts claim she tearfully admitted to a friend that she'd done something wrong but never explained what. And then there was the bank check. Roughly 7 months after Polly disappeared, a check from a pension or other account, issued in her name, was cashed at a bank in Alabama, where she had family ties. The signature on the check was never conclusively proven to be hers, and the person at the teller window was never positively identified. But it was enough to keep the theory alive that Polly hadn't died in the Smokies at all, that she had walked out of that park under her own power and chosen not to look back. If that's true, then Deep Creek was the stage for a carefully planned exit. It would mean that while her friends thought they were out for a casual hike, Polly was working through a very different script in her head. Where she would go when she stepped out of sight. How she would get from the trail to a road. Who might be waiting. The other theory is harsher, and in some ways simpler, that something went wrong in those minutes she was out of sight. A medical event. A misstep near a drop-off. A slip into fast water. The Smokies are full of places where a single mistake can leave you immobilized just far enough off trail that no one ever finds you. What makes Polly's case so unnerving is that there's nothing in between. No dropped pack. No partial remains discovered years later under a fallen tree. Just a woman walking up a familiar path who speeds up, rounds a bend, and disappears from the story. Today, she's still listed as a missing person, her image preserved in aging photos and updated age progression sketches that try to imagine what a woman in her late 50s might look like now in her 80s, if she's alive at all. So what connects Dennis and Polly? Two very different people, a 6-year-old boy on a family camping trip and a 58-year-old woman on her third marriage, vanishing in the same national park 12 years apart. Two cases that triggered searches, spawned theories, and settled into a kind of permanent, uneasy silence. It's not that Great Smoky Mountains National Park is uniquely deadly. Statistically, your drive to the trailhead is more dangerous than your walk up to Laurel Falls. Most hikers who get lost are found, often embarrassed but alive. Plenty of people suffer heart attacks or accidents and are recovered, mourned, and buried with names on their headstones. Dennis and Polly are different because they left nothing behind. No final scene. No confirmed remains. No neat, comforting answer for the people who loved them. If you stand on any overlook in the Smokies and look out across the overlapping ridges, you can see how easy it would be to hide a secret here. The forest is thick. The slopes are steep. Old logging roads and animal paths crisscross the valleys. Storms wash out clues. Leaves bury what hand-painted trailblazes once tried to reveal. Rangers will tell you the best way to respect these mountains is simple: prepare, stick to marked trails, tell someone where you're going and when you'll be back. Bring a map, not just a dying phone. Respect the weather. Respect your limits. They've learned those lessons the hard way. But even they will admit there are things they can't explain. A 6-year-old who stepped into the trees and didn't step out again. A woman who walked ahead on a familiar path and never reached the trailhead. Somewhere, in the spray of Laurel Falls and the thousand voices of the creeks and the low whisper of wind through spruce and fir, their stories are still here. So the next time you're in a place like this, camera out, feet on wet rock, the guardrail cold under your hands, take a moment. Look around. Notice how quickly the world goes silent just a few steps off trail. Think about the people whose names live here now, stitched into the map in ways you can't see. Dennis Martin. Thelma Pauline, Polly Melton. Two of the Smokies' most enduring mysteries. You'll go back to your car tonight. You'll drive out of the park, maybe stop for ice cream, maybe complain about the traffic on the way home. Your footprints will fade with the next rain. But their stories stay. And somewhere between the roar of the waterfall and the hush of the trees, the mountains keep their secrets.